This spring, for the second year in a row, the state Senate has approved, in bipartisan fashion, legislation that would impose stricter regulations over the ingredients in cosmetic and personal care products. The measure has yet to move in the state assembly and has attracted some high-profile opposition from household brand names. For more on the consumer protection measure, we're joined on the Capitol Press Room by Oriene Shin, a manager for safety advocacy at Consumer Reports, which supports the pending legislation. Thanks for making the time, Oriene.
Hi, it's really great to be here. Happy to be here.
I'm glad to have you. So, if this measure was enacted, how would it change what products are available in New York? Or, I guess, how might it change the recipes, so to speak, of certain cosmetic or personal care products?
So, when this bill gets passed and enacted, products will become safer and healthier for New Yorkers across the state. And it'll have impacts across the country too, because New York is just such a hub for commerce. And so, what this will do is really remove the most toxic of chemicals, so like heavy metals, lead, arsenic, cadmium, and other chemicals that release formaldehyde, for example. So these are the types of things that we want out of our products that we use every day or regularly. CR did released a couple of reports over the past couple of years showing that in our testing of braiding hair as well as hair dyes that such toxic chemicals are rampant, and this is the time is now to get them out.
So you mentioned toxic chemicals, and some of those that you just listed are ones that definitely raise a red flag in this non-scientist's brain. But how prevalent are those types of chemicals? Is there a reason to believe that they are in widespread use right now on products that are on shelves in New York?
So the quick answer is that from our own studies and our own testing of hair dyes and hair braiding, we do know that a lot of these toxic chemicals are rampant. That we know that 28 out of the 30, I believe, braiding hairs were tested positive for contaminants, for heavy metals, for example. And so this is an issue that needs to be addressed. And let's be clear, if it wasn't an issue, then this bill wouldn't have so much strong opposition from industry. It's something that needs to be addressed, and it's something that other countries and other states have already started to address, and New York has a chance to lead here.
Well, thinking about the opposition, when we talked with the Business Council of New York last year, one of the issues they raised was this idea that, a chemical might be toxic or problematic in one application or at certain levels, but in other applications or at lower levels, it can be used safely, and that this bill, with its wide sweeping approach, doesn't bring that sort of nuance into consideration. What do you think of that concern?
So consumer reports, we're always thinking about how are these products being used? And a lot of these personal care products that people use on a daily basis, maybe even multiple times a day, a lot of these toxic chemicals can have a cumulative effect. And we're not even bringing in the other products that are out there that aren't cosmetics or personal care products that are also contributing to this cumulative effect of these chemicals. And so if you're thinking about in your daily life, how you're being exposed to these toxic chemicals on a daily basis, on a regular basis, it can have a profound impact. And so, if we can limit it in products that people use regularly, like lotions or makeup, cosmetics, then that is what we want to see, because the fewer areas where people can be exposed to these things, the better, because we know that a lot of these things can build up in our bodies over time and can have those really negative impacts that we want to avoid.
But is there a difference, for example, between how a chemical that might be found in an eyeliner might impact you as sort of a topical application versus if you were to swallow that same chemical? And if there is a difference, does that bill that we're talking about take into consideration that type of nuance?
What we're talking about here is an issue where the absorption rate might be different. I'm not a scientist, so I can't really speak to how it's being absorbed or not. But what is clear is that the different modes of exposure all can build up. And that is what is important to make sure that we can avoid and prevent if we can. And we also know that safer formulations are out there. We also know that countries are already moving this way. The market is already moving this way. We've heard from consumers that want this kind of change to happen anyway. And so this bill really is to encourage and to push forward a future that we all want to see.
Well, yeah, you mentioned the idea that there are other regulations taking effect outside of New York, and the memorandum accompanying this bill makes the case that Europe, for example, has embraced consumer protections in this space. But in opposing this legislation, business groups argue that New York is going beyond what's happening, say, across the Atlantic, or even further than what's been advanced in California. And what they said on our show was, hey, we would be more likely to accept something that was in line with what is already in effect in states like California. So why does it make sense for New York to go out on its own, so to speak, and begin to embrace its own regulatory landscape as opposed to following what other states or other countries are doing specifically, as opposed to just the spirit of what they're doing?
Yeah, sure. First of all, New York is one of the largest consumer markets in the world. It is also a leader when it comes to these types of bills and this kind of work that consumers want to see. When New York bans a chemical, major retailers and distributors will listen. And so the reason why it's so important is that New York has this opportunity to lead and to make sure that we're future-proofing even further. Other countries and California and other states have started the work, but it really is New York's opportunity to really advance the work.
In our everyday lives, there are decisions that we make where we decide whether risk is acceptable or not acceptable. And we're able to do that in some cases because we have informed decisions that we can make because with something like alcohol or pharmaceuticals or cigarettes, there are appropriate warning labels. So why not treat this with that same sort of calculation that we let people know what's in their products in simple, clear, plain language and let them decide, okay, that risk is worth it to me, or no, I'm not ready to take that risk for whatever reason.
So I believe that there are certain bills or certain conversations happening about disclosure, but this bill really is about taking the step that Consumer Reports really wants to see happen is to get these products physically out of the products that we use every day. And while disclosure and providing consumer choice is important, a lot of these chemicals that we're talking about, again, it's the toxic chemicals that have been known carcinogens. These are known carcinogens or have been connected to negative neurological defects. Like these are the things that we don't want to be applying to our bodies, nor do we want really our society or our communities to be exposed to, especially when we're thinking about how this can disproportionately impact certain communities of color more than others, especially when we're thinking about how women on average use 12 different personal care products daily, right? Like these are the types of things that we have to consider. And if we're thinking about the cumulative effect of what could happen, this is something that this bill will address.
So this bill has, I believe, an effective date of 2030. Why do we believe that that is the appropriate window to give all of these manufacturers to get up to speed on changing their products or taking products off the shelves?
So, as industry, as you had mentioned, companies have already taken steps because other states and other countries are already eliminating some of these. And so, when we're talking about another 4 years to reformulate and implement, it seems like a reasonable amount of time.
And as you mentioned earlier, you're not a scientist. I'm not a scientist. The people who wrote this bill are definitely not scientists. But the bill specifically identifies chemicals and chemical formulations. Why not leave that to, say, the Department of Health or the State Department of Environmental Conservation and simply say, we'd like you to restrict anything that might have problematic health consequences, as opposed to leaving it to lawmakers to formulate that list?
So the list that was provided in the list that is provided in the bill is a list that was created before CR formally supported. And so I have to trust that this had been reviewed by technical experts and our scientists and our testers here at the S Consumer Reports has also reviewed and have been in support of this ban.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this conversation. We've been speaking with Oriene Shin. They are a manager for safety advocacy at Consumer Reports. Oriene, thank you so much for making the time and walking us through this legislation. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you so much.
Fraud and lawsuit abuse raise car insurance costs for New Yorkers. Reforms are being proposed to mitigate their impact, but some Albany leaders want to keep the status quo. Information on these reforms is available at keepnewyorkaffordable.org.
Support for the Capitol Press Room is provided by New York State United Teachers, a statewide union of nearly 700,000 professionals in education and healthcare.